The impeachment vote in the House taken against President Donald Trump earlier this week went largely along party lines. And while a few Democrats did vote against the measure, not a single Republican supported the idea. I discussed the week's developments with people with opposing points of view. Sid Starks represents the 1st Hamden and Hampshire District on the Republican State Committee, which works to increase GOP membership in Massachusetts. John Bonifaz is an Amherst resident and president of Free Speech for People, a nonpartisan organization. I asked each of them for their reaction to the House's impeachment vote.
The overall news, it's not surprising. It's also, I believe, a waste of time with the American tax dollars. They could be spent in much better ways, and I think the majority of the Americans believe that.
John, how about for you?
I think it was an historic day. I think that the president had to be held accountable by the House of Representatives with these articles of impeachment. There's actually many more high crimes he's committed for which he should be held accountable, and the Senate must now do its duty and hold a full and fair trial. This president has been defying the Constitution, the rule of law, and shredding the Constitution on a nearly daily basis since he took the oath of office. And these abuses of power, in which he solicited illegally foreign interference to help his reelection campaign, engaging in extortion and bribery at the same time in doing so, and then obstructing Congress in its investigation, all of those are exactly what the framers sought to have in the Constitution with the impeachment clause for that very reason.
I'd like to have the freedom to respond.
Please go right ahead.
These are allegations. They haven't been sent to the Senate yet, so they're allegations. And saying that he's violated the Constitution just the other day, Dick Durbin, Patrick Leahy, there was a memo sent to Ukraine encouraging them in 2018 to continue to try to find dirt on President Trump with the alleged collusion with the Russians. So to me, this has become a campaign tactic of the Socialist Democrats to take away the fact that the country is thriving, that the people in America are having a great economy, jobs, people are working, and to me it's a campaign tactic. Ever since the election, the Democrats have been saying, we will impeach Donald Trump. And the fact is, he's the president of the United States. The economy is moving in the right direction. He's up for re-election.
The way that both of you have responded, essentially along party lines, Democrat, Republican here, and that is.
To be clear, I'm running a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that defends our democracy and our Constitution. This isn't about political party. This isn't about electoral politics. This is about placing country over party and principle over politics. In fact, we were opposed to the House leadership's position on this for many months because they refused to carry out their duty and start this impeachment inquiry. So this is not about Democrats versus Republicans. There's a member of Congress, Justin Amash, who happened to be a Republican. He left the Republican Party. He's now an independent. He voted for those articles of impeachment. And I think it's a big mistake to paint this as just another example of partisan politics. This is a threat to our republic.
Sorry, I don't mean to jump in.
Right.
But the way that the vote came down was largely along party lines. Not a single Republican voted for impeachment in the House.
Justin Amash was a Republican until very recently, and he voted for those articles of impeachment. But the rest of the Republicans are complicit with this criminal enterprise out of the Oval Office. And the fact is, we can be debating whether the earth is flat or round, but the facts speak for themselves. The earth is round, and there are truths involved here. There are facts that occurred. We have the transcript, the summary of the transcript of this call that President Trump made to President Zelensky. He sought directly in that call illegal assistance in his reelection campaign. We now saw the witnesses that came before the House Intelligence Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, making the case, really, for why these articles of impeachment had to be issued. And I just think, it's amazing to me that the defenders of this president continue to spew out lies and distortions of the truth in terms of what the facts actually say on this record.
So, John, you're calling me a liar. I defend the president. These are allegations. And to me, it's a cover-up from what happened with the Democrats. And again, it shouldn't be partisan politics. It shouldn't be Democrat and Republican. Unfortunately, the socialist side, the liberals, have made it that because it's all about power.
So can I ask you a question?
Do you
think it's okay for a president of the United States to solicit assistance from a foreign government for his reelection campaign? Do you think that's okay?
Did he? That's the question.
I want to know first, do you think it's okay? If he did that, do you think that's
Then
okay?
we would have to go back to President Obama. We would have to go back to Secretary of State Hillary
I'm
Clinton.
getting the answer.
You are. No, it's not. And do
it's
you
not
have,
okay. Good. I'm glad we've established that.
We've established that. And have you proven that? You seem to
why
be. You seem to be
why
the.
don't we go ahead then and agree?
You seem to be the attorney and the jury on this.
Why don't we go ahead and have the jury, the Senate?
I agree.
Hear the evidence, not just have a quick dismissal of this. So, do you call on Senator Mitch McConnell to allow for a full and fair trial of that specific question?
Right now, it's up to Nancy Pelosi. Mitch McConnell said he's ready.
No, Nancy Pelosi is not submitting the articles yet because Mitch McConnell has said he will fully coordinate with the White House and the president on his defense. He's acting like this is going to be a kangaroo court.
When you say fair trial, the accused is due a fair trial. You're saying the accusers should be allowed to do whatever they want.
Senator McConnell has made clear.
I'm going to jump in here just for 1 second so we can move on to a slightly different variant of this issue. I want to pull up something.
We're having beverages afterwards.
Yes, we are.
I appreciate the lively discussion, surely do. Presidential candidates met last night on the Democratic side to have a debate, and Andrew Yang said something that was a little different than the rest of the Democrats who were on the debate stage last night regarding impeachment.
The more we act like Donald Trump is the cause of all of our problems, the more Americans lose trust that we can actually see what's going on in our communities and solve those problems. What we have to do is we have to stop being obsessed over impeachment, which unfortunately strikes many Americans like a ball game where you know what the score is going to be, and start actually digging in and solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place.
So a couple things I want to tease out there. I'll work backward. Is impeachment a fait accompli? The House impeached. Now it's going to move to the Senate eventually. And many people say they believe that the Senate won't, in fact, impeach the president. Will this issue help the country?
Well, I think it's very important that a lawless president be held accountable for the crimes that he's committing against the state: abuse of power, abuse of the public trust. Now, my disagreement with Andrew Yang is somehow the notion that we can't be focused on other problems facing the country, from poverty to climate change to the economy and economic justice questions, that somehow we can't talk about those things as well. We can. But that doesn't mean that we ignore this gross abuse of power coming out of the Oval Office. And frankly, I think members of the House need to do more than they've already done, because there are other high crimes, multiple impeachable offenses that this president has committed. He's been treating the Oval Office as a profit-making enterprise at the public expense, violating the emoluments clauses of the Constitution, and the list goes on from there. So I don't agree with Andrew Yang that somehow we should ignore the abuses of power coming out of this president.
Sid, what's your take on what Mr. Yang said?
It's very interesting. You've already convicted him. Lawless, abuse of power. Has that been proven?
You know what, Sid? I welcome you calling on Senator McConnell to hold a full and fair trial.
This is not about Senator McConnell.
No, but you're a member of the Republican Party.
You've already convicted him.
Sid, I believe the evidence is overwhelming that this president has committed abuses of power. But if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But let the evidence come forward for the American people. And that process involves a full and fair trial in the United States Senate.
I agree.
With impartial justice. Under every single one of those senators will have to take an oath that they will give impartial justice.
You have not been impartial. You've already said lies. No, you're not.
I'm not a senator. I'm talking about those in the United States Senate who must convene a full and fair trial to hear the evidence. And you, as a member of the Republican Party, can call on your leader, Senator McConnell, to do that.
Me, as an American citizen, a taxpayer, a voter, a Christian, I want a fair trial. It seems that you've already convicted him as an American citizen. You've called him lawless, abuse of power. These are all allegations. Yes, the House has done a partisan move and voted to send it to the Senate. Yes, it's up to Senator McConnell. Will he do that? We will find out soon. My understanding, the House has already recessed. Nancy Pelosi is holding the papers. They've recessed till after the holidays so the media can keep pushing this over the holidays.
I'm going to jump in here because I feel like we're talking on this point quite a bit. I want to pull out something else that Mr. Yang said, which speaks to the problems that he brings up that are facing Americans across the country. In what he is saying, I think you could hear that he is making the case that perhaps Republicans are making a stronger case, the president is making a stronger case than Democrats, that they see the problems of Americans more strongly than Democrats do. Do you believe that to be the case?
I believe the way the Democrats are acting in the past several years, the American people are looking towards common sense. When you have a thriving economy, and you can say it was before President Trump entered office, if it has been, then why are the Democrats trying to change it? We have a thriving economy. People have jobs now. There are job wanted signs throughout the area. East Long Meadow, people can't hire enough people because the economy is thriving. People are optimistic. And honestly, people are tired of the BS of the media, not necessarily fake media, but the propaganda being presented about how bad the president is. The president has been called every name in the book. Do I agree with everything he's doing? Absolutely not. But he is doing what he promised. How many politicians, even in our area, make promises and never keep them? They're out to get elected each year. They're out to keep their power. President Trump is doing what he said he would do. So I think the American people are looking for optimism.
Here's a promise that the president made running for election in
And this is a
2016.
fact.
He made a promise to drain the swamp. He is a swamp. He's one of the most corrupt presidents to occupy the Oval Office. He started out refusing to divest from his business interests all over the world and treating the Oval Office as a profit-making enterprise at the public expense.
proof of that.
Directly violating. We know he did not fully divest. He said when he announced that he was going to transfer the day-to-day management of his company over to his two eldest sons, he would still maintain the control of that company and profit off of the Oval Office.
I'll let you respond really quickly, and then I'm going to move on to something else.
He's accepting his annual salary as president, I see. No, he's donating it.
He's taking illegal foreign payments from foreign governments and foreign benefits all over the world with his businesses. He has businesses in Turkey and India, all
It's
over
obviously
the place.
he does not like President Trump. I cannot change your attitude, and I'm not even going to try.
I believe people need to obey their oath of office, and he took an oath
Then
of
there would be
office
nobody
to
in
protect
Congress.
and defend
There
the
would be
Constitution.
nobody in
We're gonna move
Congress.
on to, again, appreciate the lively discussion. Move on to this. Sid, you are a member of the Republican State Committee.
Correct.
And as such, you help with fundraising and building people, bringing more people into the GOP
Correct.
in Massachusetts. Has the issue of impeachment helped that cause?
Not necessarily impeachment. Again, people are optimistic. People are coming, not just people that are working, but people that are out of college. They're coming in and says, I want a better life. I'm tired of having my freedoms taken away. And I think most of the people, it's not necessarily impeachment, it's the fact that we're losing our freedoms. Right now, if you believe in freedom of speech, unless I disagree with you. That's how most people are, both sides. Freedom of speech is great unless you don't believe like I do. And there are no civil conversations anymore. There's no civil debate. It becomes, as you said, lively. It becomes disturbing. I have friends that are liberal, and that's fine. They're still my friends. There are some people that they won't talk to you because, oh no, you're a conservative. You believe differently than I do. So I believe that's the big reason. People just want to bring civility back to America.
John, anything you want to add?
Well, if anyone's bringing civility back to America, it's certainly not the President of the United States. He's been one of the most uncivil people ever occupy that Oval Office. He spews racial hatred. He engages in locking up kids in cages at the southern border. I mean, this is a president who has so willfully defied the rule of law and our Constitution that it's really apples and oranges to be talking about him in somehow the same breath we're talking about civility.
I believe the NAACP gave him their highest award. I don't know. I guess that makes him a racist.
NAACP has called for his impeachment and removal from the office, so I don't know what you're talking about there. There's no higher award than that. I mean, he has engaged in such gross abuse of power that organizations like the NAACP have come out and called for his removal.
Case proven. You're never going to like President Trump. Election day, determines who will be our next president.
We have impeachment in the Constitution to deal with gross abuses of power.
Ele-
Elections are not for that. We have impeachment
That seems to be what the Democrats are doing,
I
though,
think-
using
what I
impeachment.
just heard Mr. Boniface saying, correct me if I'm wrong, he was talking about impeachment broadly, not necessarily
Right.
directed specifically at President Trump. You were talking about the power of impeachment.
Correct.
And what it holds.
The clause that the framers placed in the Constitution for impeachment is to deal with a direct and present threat to the Constitution, to the Republic, by any official of the government. In this case, it's the President of the United States. He's a threat to our democracy, and he must be removed from public office.
We have to leave it there. Thank you
Thank you.
so much, gentlemen, for coming in today. Really appreciate it.
Okay.